They abandoned him when he needed them most. Broken by war, discarded by family, David Coleman found solace in a forgotten bee farm. What began as therapy became a thriving empire. But when his past shows up, hungry for a share of his success, David doesn't just survive, he rises. This is the true story of how one man turned pain into purpose, and betrayal into a legacy buzzing with hope. David Coleman, a 35-year-old former soldier, finds himself far from the battlefield, surrounded by the hum of bees on a rural Oregon farm. The scent of honey and earth wraps around him like a bomb. Each bee with its quiet mission reminds him of who he used to be, a man who once lived for duty and family. Yet that family betrayed him. The pain still lingers, etched deeper than the scars on his body. Born and raised in a modest home on Belmont Street near Portland, David grew up under the cold, calculating eyes of his banker father, James, and the sharp-tongued charm of his mother, Linda. While the Coleman house looked perfect on the outside, it was a place of warped priorities. Lavish spending and performative status always came before stability. Despite that, David shared a close bond with his younger brother, Mark. The boys learned responsibility early, carrying burdens their parents never acknowledged. At 18, desperate to escape and bring financial stability to his family, David enlisted. In the U.S. Army, boot camp was grueling, but David found purpose and brotherhood among his fellow soldiers. Every paycheck he earned was sent home. He believed it was his duty. Letters from Mark were his lifeline. The boy's gratitude gave meaning to David's sacrifice, but over time, his parents' demands grew insatiable. They retired early, misused the money David sent, and lived in reckless comfort while Mark struggled to afford textbooks. A confrontation during one visit home marked the first visible crack in David's loyalty. At 27, while leading a supply convoy mission in the Middle East, David's Humvee was struck by an id. He lost his right leg, and worse, his friend Jake died beside him. Haunted by survivor's guilt and PTSD, David was honorably discharged at 28. He returned to his childhood home expecting healing, but what he received was scorn. Initially welcomed, his parents' sympathy vanished within months. His father called him a burden. His mother ridiculed him for not earning. Despite panic attacks, David tried to work. After a public PTSD episode at a store where he worked as a security guard, he was fired. That Christmas, his parents disowned him during dinner. They dismissed his military service, called him useless, and told him to leave. With nowhere to go, David turned to his estranged grandfather Henry, a beekeeper in rural Oregon. Grandpa welcomed him without question, offering not just shelter, but silent understanding. The farm, humming with life and peace, became David's sanctuary. Nightmares still haunted him, but Henry's quiet presence helped David breathe again. Working with the bees, David found a rhythm, a therapy no doctor could provide. Henry shared his philosophy: bees don't abandon their own. Listen to their hum. They'll teach you how to live. Henry revealed a painful truth: David's parents had once stolen his savings, too, but rather than rage, Henry embraced peace. Life's too short to hold grudges. Let go. Inspired, David slowly rebuilt himself. He studied modern beekeeping, installed tech sensors, and envisioned expanding the farm. With Henry's encouragement, he created a brand, Coleman Honey Farm. He began marketing online, sharing videos and learning how to tell their story to the world. David remembered the first time he held his phone to film Grandpa harvesting honey. His hands shook so much that the footage was a blurry mess, but he didn't give up. He learned to use simple editing software, wrote short posts about the beekeeping process, and shared his story, a veteran finding new meaning among the bees. He didn't delve into the details of his PTSD or his family's betrayal, but he spoke about healing, how the hum of the bees helped him find peace. Early posts and videos received only a handful of views, mostly from neighbors and Grandpa's friends, but then a short video of Grandpa and David checking hives at sunset went viral. Someone had shared it in an organic products group, and overnight, it racked up hundreds of views. David started getting messages from strangers, people asking to buy their honey or learn about their care methods. One person wrote, "Your story inspires me. Thank you for sharing." David read that message on the porch and, for the first time in years, felt truly valued. He and Grandpa began packaging honey in small glass jars labeled with a simple logo. David designed a bee against a green field. They sold through Instagram, local farmers markets, and eventually received orders from neighboring states. The money coming in wasn't much, but it was enough to buy more equipment and expand the hives. Grandpa, though well into his 70s, worked tirelessly. David saw how happy he was. "You've made my dream come true," Grandpa said one day, as they tallied the month's revenue. David shook his head and replied, "No, Grandpa, I'm just carrying your dream forward." Within a year, the bee farm grew beyond anything David imagined. They hired 2 employees, a young woman named Sarah, passionate about organic farming, and a guy named Tom who had worked at a nearby farm. They brought fresh energy. David began to feel the farm wasn't just Grandpa's and his, it was a community. They built a brand, Coleman honey became a favorite at organic food stores and started shipping to California, Washington, and even a few orders to Canada. But for David, the growth wasn't about money, it was about reclaiming confidence. The panic attacks still came, but less frequently. Some days, a loud noise still startled him or nightmares jolted him awake, but the farm grounded him. One day, while filming a video about checking hives, David's phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. He had graduated from college, was working in Seattle, and wanted to visit. "David, I saw your farm on YouTube. I'm proud of you," the message read. David smiled, heartwarming. Mark was the only family member he still kept in touch with, sparingly. He texted back, inviting him to visit. A few weeks later, David stood on the porch watching the dirt road, heart racing like a kid on Christmas. Mark had promised to come that weekend, and today was the day. When Mark's rental car rolled in, kicking up sunset-lit dust, David saw him step out taller than he remembered, in a light blue shirt and the same bright smile from childhood. "David," Mark called, running over to hug him tightly. David hugged him back, and in that moment, the years apart seemed to melt. "Welcome home, kid," he whispered, voice catching. Mark laughed, playfully punching David's shoulder. "Home, you've turned this farm into a bee empire." Grandpa Henry stood at the door, eyes twinkling. "Come on in, Mark," he said. "I've got some honey-glazed ribs that'll knock your socks off." Inside the small wooden house, the scent of roasted meat and pine filled the air. The table was simply set, with a jar of Coleman honey at the center. Over dinner, laughter flowed. Mark talked about life in Seattle and his tech job. He admitted he'd been bragging about his honey mogul brother. Grandpa chimed in, teasing David about when he dropped a high frame early on. The three of them laughed until tears came. Midway through dinner, Mark grew quiet. "David, I'm sorry," he said. "Back then, at home, I didn't stand up for you. I knew Mom and Dad treated you terribly, but I was scared." David shook his head, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. "You were young. You did what you could. I don't blame you." Mark nodded, eyes red. The wound between them had begun to heal. Grandpa raised his glass of cider, a toast to cracks that are mending and misunderstandings that are fading. Glasses clinked. For the first time in years, David felt he truly belonged on out of duty. But love. Mark stayed the weekend and promised to return. When he did, he brought more than luggage. He carried business ideas, energy, and purpose. Beeswax cosmetics, scented candles, experience tours. "We can make Coleman honey more than honey, it can be an experience," he said. Together they began experimenting. Mark helped launch online sales. Visitors came from cities just to see the farm and meet the people behind the story. Grandpa watched from the porch, his joy unmistakable. But then, one afternoon, a silver car rolled up the driveway. David thought it was a customer. His chest tightened when he saw who stepped out. James and Linda Coleman, his parents, dressed impeccably, wearing plastic smiles. "David," his mother said sweetly, "we need to talk." David stood frozen. Grandpa stepped beside him silently, a fortress. "James, Linda," Grandpa said, voice low and firm, "what are you doing here?" His mother faltered, looking to his father. "We know we were wrong," James said. "We want to apologize, reunite." David saw through them. Their eyes didn't reflect regret, but calculation. "We saw your farm online," his mother added. "We're proud of you. We want to be part of it." David remembered that Christmas Eve, the names, the cruelty. Grandpa's voice sliced through. "You took my savings, abandoned David. Now you come when he's successful." James stiffened. "That was a long time ago. We want to make it right." David steadied his breath. "I spent my youth supporting this family. You turned your backs. I don't need your apologies." His mother cried, "You can't treat us this way, we're family." David shook his head. "Family isn't the people who abandon you. Family is Grandpa, Mark, the ones who stayed." James's temper flared. "Who do you think you are? Some farm owner? You're still just a crippled soldier who lived off us." David met his gaze. "I'm David Coleman, the man who built this farm from nothing. I don't need you." Grandpa's voice was steel. "Leave and don't come back." They left. This time David didn't feel rage, only relief. He'd cut the final tie. After his parents' departure, David stood on the porch with Grandpa and Mark. The wind rustled the trees, but the air around them felt still, like the ending of a storm. "That's the last time they'll walk this land," Grandpa said, his voice gentle but firm. David nodded. "I think I finally believe that I don't owe them anything." Grandpa placed a hand on David's shoulder. "You've always been more than what they saw. Now the world sees it too." Over the following weeks, a sense of clarity settled into David's bones. His mornings were no longer shadowed by shame or the echo of his father's criticisms. Instead, he found joy in simple rituals: feeding the chickens, inspecting the hives, sipping coffee while watching mist rise over the fields. The farm continued to flourish. They added a greenhouse to grow herbs that would complement their beeswax products. Mark introduced a new packaging design, clean, modern, and eco-friendly, that caught the attention of boutique stores across the Pacific Northwest. One day, while labeling honey jars, Sarah approached David with a hesitant smile. "I think we should offer tours. People want to meet the bees and the man behind the farm." David laughed nervously. "You think anyone wants to meet me?" Sarah gave him a pointed look. "You're a veteran, a survivor, and an innovator. People relate to that." He eventually agreed, and within weeks, Coleman Honey's weekend tours became a hit. Families arrived from Portland and Seattle, eager to suit up in mesh veils and learn about hive behavior. Children laughed as bees buzzed past wildflowers. For every question answered, David felt his confidence grow. During one tour, a boy asked, "Were you scared in the war?" David paused. "Yes," he said honestly. "But the bees taught me that fear doesn't have to stop you. You just keep moving, keep working." Afterward, the boy's father, also a veteran, shook David's hand. "You're doing more here than you realize." In quiet moments, David walked the edge of the fields, often with Grandpa at his side. They discussed plans for a seasonal festival, with honey tastings, candle-making stations, and local musicians. "You've built more than a farm," Grandpa said one evening. "You've built a legacy." David felt it too, not just in the growing bank balance or the mentions in lifestyle magazines, but in the laughter of visitors, the camaraderie among his team, and the inner stillness that replaced his chaos. Then came the call. A production company, partnering with a veterans nonprofit, had heard of Coleman Honey and wanted to feature them in a documentary about healing through nature. David hesitated. Sharing his story on camera meant reopening wounds he'd carefully sutured, but after a night of restless sleep, he stood in the morning sun, watching the bees swarm out in their purposeful flight. "I'll do it," he said to no one and everyone. Filming took a week. The crew followed David through every step, cleaning hives, leading tours, sitting with Grandpa on the porch. When the final interview came, the director asked, "If you could say something to your past self, the one just getting off the plane from deployment, what would it be?" David looked into the lens. "You're going to lose things, family, dignity, but you'll find something greater: peace, purpose, a home of your own, and the hum of bees will guide you there." The documentary aired nationally on Veterans Day. Overnight, their website crashed from traffic. Orders surged, but what mattered more were the messages, hundreds of emails from fellow veterans, widows, children. One, from the wife of his fallen friend Jake, simply read, "You kept your promise. You lived." David printed it and pinned it beside his desk. He spent that winter writing blog posts, not just about honey, but about resilience. He partnered with veteran support groups to sponsor retreats on the farm. They called it the Hive Haven Project. Mark expanded operations to a second plot of land nearby. Sarah launched an educational YouTube channel. Grandpa, older now, watched with quiet pride. One spring morning, Mark nudged David. "You know, we could apply for a community grant and build a center, a place for veterans and their families to learn, rest, recover." David nodded. "Let's do it." He turned to Grandpa, who was watering herbs nearby. "What do you think about expanding the hive?" Grandpa chuckled. "Just remember, bees only grow when the queen's ready." David grinned. "Then it's a good thing we're all buzzing." And as the sun rose higher, casting gold over the hives, David Coleman stood in the heart of his home, not a battlefield, not a broken past, but a future built on wings and healing. In the months after David's confrontation with his parents, life at Coleman Honey surged forward like spring honey through a spinner. The toxic fog of the past had finally cleared, and for the first time in decades, David felt unburdened. Each sunrise brought a sense of purpose, and each jar sealed with its Greenfield logo told the story of resilience. Mark, now fully invested in the farm, moved from Seattle and turned the attic loft into a compact workspace and bedroom. He joked that the buzz from the hives helped him think clearly than any tech office he'd ever worked in. Together they launched new product lines: beeswax candles scented with lavender and lemon balm, moisturizing salves for hikers and farmers, and honey-based face masks. Sarah took charge of customer outreach while Tom oversaw hive maintenance. With everyone's efforts, Coleman Honey's online orders tripled within 6 months. But success came with its challenges. One day, David received an email from a major chain of organic food stores. They offered to stock Coleman Honey across 12 states. It was an opportunity most small farmers dreamed of, but the offer came with strings: mass production, standardized packaging, and bulk discounts that would slash profits and compromise the handmade integrity of their work. David stared at the screen for a long time. Mark, noticing his unease, sat beside him. "We don't have to sell our souls to grow, David," he said. "I know, but it's tempting," David replied, sighing. "This kind of deal could set us up for life." Grandpa, overhearing, walked in with a steaming mug of herbal tea. "What's the worth of honey if you have to strip the soul out of it?" he asked, placing the cup gently in David's hand. They declined the offer, choosing instead to expand their local presence. Mark designed a traveling bee education booth, which toured schools and farmer expos. David began speaking at veteran support groups, sharing how bees had helped him reclaim his life. And then came the letter this time, not from his parents but from a major non-profit supporting wounded veterans. They'd seen David's story in a regional publication and wanted to feature Coleman Honey in a national documentary. The recognition overwhelmed David. For years he'd felt invisible, his scars hidden beneath layers of silence and shame. Now his story was a beacon. The documentary aired during Veterans Day weekend. Orders poured in. Messages from fellow veterans filled his inbox, some asking for advice, others just saying, "You gave me hope." David read every single one. The message stood out. It was from the wife of a soldier. David had served with Jake, the friend he lost in the convoy blast. She thanked David for mentioning Jake in the documentary and shared that her teenage son had watched it and now wanted to study agriculture. David wrote back, "Jake's legacy deserves to live, and if I can pass on what he stood for through these bees, I will."